Good evening. This week's parsha, Parshas Tazria, there is a law, a halacha that pervades the entire parsha, but at first glance seems difficult to understand. The Torah clearly states that when a person, a Jew, experiences a tzaras, which was, as we know, an unusual illness, identified by a white patch appearing on the skin of a person, with other symptoms following that, and this was symptomatic of a profound emotional and spiritual illness or blemish within this individual. So the white patch plus secondary symptoms determined the person as being temporary, impure, temporary tameh. It required him or her to be quarantined, to be separated from the community, badad yeshev, mechutz lamachana meishavi, and undergo an intense program of spiritual introspection and healing until the symptoms were cleared up, and then the person was initiated or invited back into the community, into the kehillah of the Jewish people, and they were considered tahir, spiritually pure. The laws of tzaras applied when these symptoms were existing. We translate tzaras as leprosy because that's the closest English translation. But the symptoms of a tzaras defined in this week's parsha are quite different than a regular leprosy that we identify today. In any case, when somebody had these symptoms, and the symptoms are clearly articulated and defined in Chumash in great detail, and discussed in the Gemara and in Halacha, in Mishnayos and Masechta Negoyim, and in Halacha and Rambam, etc. The Torah clearly says, "V'huva el hakoyin, v'huva el aron hakoyin el achad mibanav hakoyanim," which means the person had to be brought to a koyin. A koyin, a priest, was the exclusive person who had right to determine whether this person was tameh or tahir, or, as the Rambam puts it, in Hilchas Tumas Tzaras, hatuma v'hatara tluya b'koyin. Contaminating or purifying the Mitzayra is dependent exclusively on the koyin. So the koyin is the one who examines all of the symptoms of the person and says, you're tahir, or says, you're tameh and you have to be quarantined. Sometimes the koyin says, we have to wait a week and re-examine it. Sometimes another week has to go through until the koyin re-examines the tzaras. So sometimes there has to be a wait of 2 weeks. And then afterwards the koyin says either you're tahir or you're tameh. And when the person is tameh and is quarantined, and then the symptoms change, the koyin is the one who goes out, checks out, examines the condition of the human being, and determines whether the person is still tameh or is tahir. That is the halacha. He is the only one who is entitled to make the verbal pronouncement of tahir or tameh. What happens if the koyin is incapable of making this pronouncement? What if the koyin does not possess the knowledge, the qualifications that are necessary for him to know whether the person is tahir or tameh? Furthermore, what if the koyin is blind? What if the koyin can't see? So he can't examine the individual. What happens if the only koyin that's available is a child? Certainly doesn't have the expertise and the knowledge that's necessary in order to give an appropriate diagnosis. What do we do in such a case? Or what if the koyin is an adult, but he doesn't have the scholarship, the knowledge that's necessary to be an expert for such a diagnosis? What is the halacha? The halacha is, as the Rambam puts it, the examination has to be through a chacham, through a scholar who has efficient knowledge of all of the symptoms and what is the law according to these symptoms. This is a chacham who's knowledgeable in all of the facets of tzaras, and he doesn't have to be a koyin. Hakol ksherin l'risas hanegoyim, the Mishnah says, and the Rambam quotes. Everybody is kosher to examine leprosy, mitzayir, if they're qualified. So what do? They tell the kohen what to say. So if the kohen can't see, if the kohen is a child, he relies on the words of the chacham. The chacham examines the person. The chacham tells the kohen, say tameh, and the kohen says tameh. Say tahir, and the kohen says tahir. So it's only he who is entitled to give the ultimate diagnosis. But in a case where he can't do it on his own, he relies on the instructions and on the guidance of the rabbi, of the scholar, and then he ultimately gives the verdict, tameh tahir. Now this requires understanding. If the kohen is regardless, relying on the directives of the chacham, of the scholar, why is the kohen so indispensable to the process? Shouldn't the scholar, who is intricately familiar with the symptoms of this malady, be trusted more than a blind kohen, more than a child kohen, more than an ignorant kohen, who does nothing but utter the diagnosis which is determined by somebody else? I mean, let's take another example. If somebody comes to a doctor, a great doctor who is professional, who is learned, who is experienced, and the doctor examines the person, and the doctor has the right diagnosis, we say the doctor doesn't have the authority to utter the actual diagnosis and demand from you to go through this procedure, to take this medication. We can't rely on the doctor. The doctor has to tell it to a kohen, and the kohen says, you have this illness, you have this problem, you have to go through this procedure, you have to take this medication. It seems ludicrous. We're anyway relying on the doctor. This is something that requires scholarship. It requires professionalism. It requires experience. It requires expertise. So why does the Torah want precisely a kohen, even in the case when he's relying on somebody else? Just rely on that person. Rely on the scholar, not on the kohen. Which brings us to a more general question. What's the idea of a kohen in general in this context? Let's say the kohen does have all the knowledge. Why do we need the kohen to determine whether you're tameh or tahir? It seems what we need is somebody who understands all of these halachas very, very well. Similarly, you have a doctor in medicine who knows all the symptoms and understands what they represent. Here too, the Torah gives us clear physical symptoms of what constitutes tzaras. Somebody who's knowledgeable in all of the laws, and in all of the various possibilities, and in all of the various manifestations, and in all of the intricate details, he is the one who's entitled to give the diagnosis. The Torah says a kohen precisely. Why is it connected to a kohen? This is even if the kohen is knowledgeable. But as I said before, the question is even stronger, especially in a case where the kohen does not profess the knowledge, and he's relying on somebody else regardless. So why is that person not allowed to give the ultimate diagnosis, and his diagnosis is worthless, and it's only the kohen who was given the power in Chumash in this week's parsha, tazria and halacha, that he is the only one who is entitled to give the ultimate verdict and the ultimate diagnosis, are you tahir or are you tameh? At one of his Fabrengens in Shabbos, in the Fabrengen of Shabbos Parshas told us, Tovshin Mem Hey, that is December 1984, the Rebbe discussed this halacha, and he gave an explanation. Now you may say, Rashi writes in this week's parsha, Tumah v'tara tluya b'koyin, it's exeris hakasav. Rashi says the fact that the tumah and the tara depends on the kohen is it's a decree of Torah. So why are we looking for rationalizations? The Torah says this is the way it should be. But everybody knows the great yisoid of the Rambam at the end of Hilchas Tmura. The Rambam says that even chukei haTorah, which are gezeres, kol masha tayachel litim leitam ten leitam. Whenever you can attempt to try some type of to try and find some type of rationale, the Rambam instructs us to do it at the end of Hilchas Tmura. Similarly, at the end of Hilchas Mikvayis, the Rambam says that although mikvah is a chuk, it's a super rational mitzvah, nonetheless there's a remez, there is a lesson here that's relevant to our own lives, as he explains there at the end. And thus here too, we ought not just to accept the words of Rashi and say it's a gzeirus hakos if we don't understand. We ought to try to dig deeper and attempt to appreciate what is the unique relationship between a kohen and the persona who is entitled to define a Mitzayra as Tameh, as being spiritually impure. More than 3 millennia ago, the Koyanim were charged with the mission of blessing the Jewish people. In Parshas Nosai, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe, telling the Koyanim to bless the Jewish people, Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, etc. To this day in Eretz Yisrael, in the Holy Land, during every shachris, during every morning service, there is a break, a point, when the Koyanim spread out their hands and they extend divine blessings on their Jewish brethren. Among diaspora Jewry outside of Eretz Yisrael, this tradition is practiced only on Yomim Tovim, on holidays. That's when we do Berachas Koyanim. When the Koyanim go up, they spread their hands and they give over the divine blessings to the Jewish people. In Zohar, in Kabbalah, the Zohar explains that the reason that the Koyanim were designated to be the channels for divine blessings is because their souls evolve from the celestial chamber of love. Or in the words of the Zohar, the souls of Koyanim originate in the sphera, in the attribute of chesed, of kindness, of grace, of love. So this gives them a unique ability to cultivate compassion and kindness towards others, and it makes them uniquely suitable to be conduits for Hashem's blessings to the Jewish people. Since a Kohen represents chesed, a Kohen's soul originates in the chamber of love, of kindness, so it makes him uniquely susceptible to be a channel to give over bracha, to give over Hashem's blessings, to transmit the energy of kindness to the Jewish people, the energy of blessing to the Jewish people. This is the reason for the halacha, as the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya v'Shulchan Aruch, quotes in Hilchas Nesiyas Kapayim, in Erechayim Simin Kuf Chav Ches, Sif Yutes from the Poskim. He says, a Kohen who hates the tzibur, a Kohen who despises the community, or a community that despises the Kohen, it's a danger for the Kohen if he goes up for Birchas Koyanim to bless the Jewish people. The source, as the Alter Rebbe puts it, for this halacha is from Zohar, Zohar Parshas Nosei, Chelik Zohar, Chelik Gimel, Daf Kuf Mem Zayin, and it's quoted also in Magen Avraham here. In Hilchas Birchas Koyanim, Hilchas Asiyas Kapayim, and Sifkat Yudches, it's quoted in Eliyahu Rabbah, Sifkat Chavav, but the source is Kabbalah, that if the Kohen hates the community or the community hates the Kohen is not allowed to go up to bless the Jewish people, and rather he has to go out of shul. And that is why the Magen Avraham writes, and the Eliyahu Rabbah writes, and Alter Rebbe quotes it. That is why the bracha that the Koyanim recite before Birchas Koyanim is unique. They say, Hashekadishanu b'kedushasei shel Aaron. Thank you, Hashem, our God, the King of the world, who sanctified us with the holiness of Aaron. V'tzivanu, and he instructed us, levarech es Amo Yisrael bi'ahava, to bless his nation Israel with love. Why the addition of the word ba'av? When you put on tefillin, you also make a blessing. Do you say, Hashekadishanu b'mitzvayso v'tzivanu lahaniach tefillin ba'ahava? He instructed us to put on tefillin with love. Or when you put on tzitzis, le'esatev b'tzitzis ba'ahava. Or when you light Shabbos candles, Shekadishanu b'mitzvayso v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbos kodesh ba'ahava, to kindle the flame with love. Of course, you should light Shabbos candles with love. You should put on tefillin with love. You should don tzitzis atalas with love. You should put up a mezuzah with love, and you should separate challah with love. But you don't say lahafresh challah ba'ahava l'kvaya mezuzah b'yava. Why? Because the mitzvah is not to love. The mitzvah is to do the act. The mitzvah is to put on tefillin, to put on tzitzis, to separate challah, to put on a mezuzah, and so on and so forth. All of the other mitzvahs where we make a bracha. The fact there should be love, of course there should be love and passion. The famous shalah, mitzvah b'loy kavana, keguf b'loy neshama. A mitzvah without an internal spiritual experience is like a body without a soul. But you fulfill the mitzvah completely even if there was no love. By Birchas Koyanim we have an exception. The Chazal gave the Koyanim a blessing. And they did not say it's a mitzvah to bless the Jewish people. It's a mitzvah to bless the Jewish people b'yahava, with love. In other words, if there's no love in the Kohen's heart to the Jewish people, he doesn't have the mitzvah to bless. if there's the antithesis of love, if there's a hatred, if there's an animosity, he should not go up to bless. And the Zohar takes it a step further. The Zohar explains that this is also the reason for the tradition that an unmarried kohen could not serve as an agent of the Jewish people, doing the avodah, performing the service in the Beis HaMikdash in the Holy Temple in Yerushalayim. Why not? The kohen may be trained. He may know all of the intricate instructions on how to perform the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. Comes the Zohar and says there that if he's not married, he can't perform the avodah. The reason is because for the kohen to be worthy for this extraordinary position, to represent the people of Israel in the service of the Beis HaMikdash, he needed to fully develop his innate capacity for love and selflessness. It's only in marriage where a person learns to share his or her life with another human being 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that the person is challenged to fully develop and bring out their full potential for caring and affection. This doesn't mean that when the kohen is unmarried, he's not kind or he's incompassionate. No. The kohen may be unmarried and he may be extremely kind and sensitive. In fact, a person could be married and be very non-loving and non-caring. I think we know that. And there could be a person who's not married and is very kind and loving and sensitive. But it means like this, that at the end of the day, when the kohen is unmarried, or anybody is not married, they have the luxury to retreat into their own hub and do things their own way. If they're not in the mood of camaraderie, if they're not in the mood of friendship, I'm not in the mood, you retreat into your own cocoon and you do your own thing. Ultimately, you don't need to answer to anybody but to yourself. Maybe to your mother if you're Jewish. But it's fine, you can retreat into your own world, which is why so many people today opt for the single life. They don't want the responsibility. They don't want the commitment. It's only in the institution of marriage that you are consistently challenged and called upon to take another person seriously, together with their deeds and their feelings and their expectations and their requirements. For a marriage to work and blossom, you can't be selfish if it's to work and blossom. So the institution of marriage challenges the kohen to bring out the full potential of caring. And that's why only the married kohen is charged with the responsibility of serving Hashem and serving the Jewish people in the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. So in summation, what we learn from here is that the kohen is channeled to bless the Jew. The kohen is given the opportunity to represent the Jewish people in service to God in the Beis HaMikdash on a daily basis. The avodah was done through kohenim. This is because the kohen is uniquely connected to the energy of love. His soul originates in the attribute of chesed, in the celestial chamber of chesed, of loving kindness. Now, according to this, we understand why the Torah will allow no one but the kohen to diagnose another human being as suffering from an illness that renders him not only severely impure, but requires him or her to be quarantined, to be separated from the community. In the case of a Mitzayra, we find that the impurity is so severe that it has consequences that doesn't exist in any other case of spiritual uncleanliness. Anybody who studies Chumash, who studies Halacha, knows that there are many forms of tumais. There are many forms of spiritual uncleanliness. But in this case, there is something unique, and that is the consequences are Bada Yeshev Mechutz Lamachana Meishavai, as the pasuk says in this week's parsha. He had to be quarantined and remain alone, become excluded from all of the communities. Not only can he walk into the Beis HaMikdash, can't go into the Harabayas, onto the Harabayas on the mountaintop, can't even be in Yerushalayim. He had to be excluded completely from all of the communities. And not only that, Badad Yeshiv, as Rashi quotes from the Gemara in Psachim Daf Samach Zayin, Shelo yiyu shar tmeim yoshvim imay. The Mitzrayim can't even make their own group. So it's not like they're quarantined and in isolation they have their own breakaway community. No, every Mitzrayim had to be quarantined independently. In other words, he had to be excluded not only from the larger community, but even from other Mitzrayim, even from other lepers. Now, this quarantation represents a spiritual concept, and that is that the person has to undergo such a powerful process of introspection and healing that till then they have to remain excluded from the community of Israel, as though they don't belong temporarily to the congregation of Israel, until they don't undergo this process of spiritual healing and the symptoms change and the Kohen reinitiates them into the community. In such a case, the Torah is making an unequivocal and absolute statement, and that is, before you diagnose a person with such a profound spiritual illness, and hence dismiss them for temporary isolation, you must make sure that you're a Kohen, that your heart is filled with love towards this human being. Because it's only then that your diagnosis and your rebuke will build rather than shatter this person's character. And it's only then that we know for sure, without any doubt, that you will search for every possible way to rehabilitate this wounded soul. Only the Kohen, who was given the chance and the power and the privilege, L'varech es Ama Yisrael be'ava, only he is given the divine authority to give out a verdict on another Jew that he's tamei with the tumah of tzaras and has to be quarantined. And this explains in a beautiful way the continuation of the pasuk, the flow of the pasuk in Parshas Shoftim, Perek Chaf Aleph pasuk Hey. The Torah describes there the role of the Kohanim. It says, Bam Bachar Hashem. They, Hashem chose l'sharsei, to serve Him, u'levarech b'shem Hashem, to bless the Jewish people in the name of Hashem, v'al piyem yeh kol riv v'chol nega, and their mouth will determine the status of every leprosy. These words are not just enumerating different responsibilities the Kohen has. Rather, they're dependent upon one another. Since Bam Bachar Hashem levarich b'shem Hashem, since they were chosen to bless the Jewish people in the name of God, therefore their mouth was chosen to determine who has a tzaras, who is a nagua, who is determined to be a leper. It's only because they know how to bless the Jewish people that they are also entitled to be able to call a Jew tamei with such a severe tumah. If you do not know how to bless the Jew, if you're not filled with love and affection and caring and attachment to the Jewish people, Torah does not give you the moral or ethical right to call another Jew tamei. Certainly the verdict of the Kohen can't be impulsive and based purely on love. It has to follow the blueprint of Torah. And that's why if he is not an expert alone, he has to turn to the experts to advise him and guide him. What are these symptoms and what is their meaning according to Torah? But who can ultimately issue the final verdict, the psak din bepoil, the ultimate verdict? It can only be through the Ish HaChesed, through the Master of Kindness. Only somebody who empathizes and who's anguished by the verdict. Only somebody who will cry the night before or the morning before or that day when he says the words tamei. Only somebody who will feel the pain because he loves another Jew. Only he has the right to say tamei. Because we know that he will not stop to inquire and make sure that this is the proper verdict. He will care about the consequences. He is not just an abstract scholar, an expert who sees the symptoms, says, sorry, you're tamei. It's his personal pain. It touches him on an intimate level, individually. So we know that he will make sure to determine that this is the true verdict, and if it's the true verdict, it is ultimately productive and not destructive. If this is the authentic verdict of Hashem, if this is the authentic verdict of Torah, he will not spare efforts and say, who cares, he's tamei, I'm not tamei. If that person is tamei, he is affected by it because in Ish HaChesed we trust him. On the other hand, if somebody doesn't have chesed, even if he's a great expert, we are suspicious. We're suspicious that he may be apathetic, he may be indifferent, he's detached from it. It's a scholarship, it's a scholastic experience. When it comes to a kohen, we know it's going to be real, and he's also going to make sure and do everything that the person could be reinitiated when the moment comes and could become tired again. And when the kohen says tamei, when the Ish HaChesed says tamei, then we know it's right. Then we know ultimately it's be productive, and we know he'll do everything he can to make him pure. And it goes so far to the point that even in those extreme situations where the only kohen who's available is a child. So in a child's case, you can't even expect him to do the research. Not only that, if the only kohen in town, it says in halacha, is a shaita, he's an imbecile, still you have to use him to say tamei or tahir. And the answer is, the Rebbe says, the physical verdict coming through a physical mouth has to go through the physical vocal cords of an Ish HaChesed, of a man of kindness. The instruction may be given through the rabbi, through the scholar, through the chacham, but issuing forth the verdict to the Jew has to go through the mouth. It has to go through the physical instruments of kindness, of an Ish HaChesed. This gives us a tremendous lesson in life. Parents, educators, spouses, employers, employees, colleagues, whichever criteria fits you, we often find ourselves with the need to rebuke, to denounce, to criticize, and sometimes punish. But all too often, these are done more as an outlet for our own anger and frustration, rather than as a tool to help these people become the best they can be. We may call it discipline, we may call it justice, we may call it chinuch, we may call it education. But the Torah is telling us this: if the penalties, if the punishments, if the rebuke, if the criticism, if the denouncement is not based on kindness, if it's not based on your love towards that child, or towards that spouse, or towards that colleague, and your desire to help them become what they're capable of becoming, they may end up being destroyed rather than built from your criticism. Principals and teachers, educators and mentors, Rosh Yeshivas, Menahalim, Mashgichim, Mashpiyim, Mechanchim, etc., sometimes feel a need to expel a student from an institution. Just as during biblical times the leper was dismissed from the community, they also feel this child is a Mitzayra. This student, Badad Yeshiv, he can't be in the yeshiva. He doesn't belong in this institution. Comes the Torah and declares, if you're not a kohen, you're forbidden from issuing forth such a verdict. If you do not genuinely love this student, this youngster, this pupil, this disciple, this boy or this girl, you have no right to expel them. You may be professional, you may be a scholar, you may be an expert, you might have all the data and statistics on the table and everything makes sense. You could be the biggest chacham in the world, but if you say tamei, it's inconsistent with halacha. You don't have the right to do it. The kohen has to do it. If you will not lose sleep over the fact that you had no choice but to dismiss the student, then it might be you who should be dismissed from your position. Because as the Rebbe puts it in the Sikha, if the Chacham tells a Jew, you're Tameh, but he's not a Kohen, so he doesn't have a right to say he's Tameh. So the Jew is not Tameh. So he is a Moitzi Shemra. What's Mitzayda? What does the Gemara say? Mitzayda is Moitzi Shemra. So he is Garda Mitzayda. He is the one who has to be dismissed, not the student. Not the Jew he dismissed. It's easy to define somebody as impure if you don't understand their pain, but it's unethical. Before you punish, you must first learn how to be a kohen, how to truly care about others. The chacham may have the right ideas. He may be right. This person may have to be dismissed. But if you're not a kohen, you're not allowed to do it. If you don't feel the anxiety of this person, if you don't empathize with them, you're not allowed to do it. You know why? Because in many cases, instead of helping them, you might undermine them. Instead of helping them rebuild themselves, rehabilitate themselves, you might undermine them. And if not, you're not thinking how to really help them, and you're doing this to help them because you care about them, then it's improper, it's inappropriate. When criticism, when punishment, when even dismissal are motivated by concern for a person rather than by our own rage or incompetence, it'll have a totally different effect on the person that you're punishing. What is more important, you will not cease to labor that the situation be reversed and the individual returns to his or her own former glory or potential glory. I want to tell you a mice. I want to tell you a story. It occurred in the 1930s in the Tafresh Tzadiks. There was a yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, a very good yeshiva, which had a Rosh Yeshiva. There was somebody at the head of the yeshiva. And there was the dean, there was the founder of the yeshiva who was responsible for it. There was a student in the yeshiva, and in the 1930s, many youngsters, many of our youth abandoned the path of Torah and mitzvahs, especially among yeshiva students. Many left the yeshivas and embarked on different paths in life. Sunday morning, a few boys approached the Rosh Yeshiva, and they testified that a particular student smoked on Shabbos publicly. Chilul Shabbos b'farhesia. A teenager, he had a craving, and he violated Shabbos publicly. In the dormitory, he took out a cigarette and he smoked. The Rosh Yeshiva called over the student and gave him 24 hours to be packed up and to leave the institution. Leave the dormitory, leave the yeshiva. He cannot come back, he cannot show his face again. He is permanently expelled from this yeshiva. In 24 hours he has to find for himself another place. Verdict is closed. The dean of the yeshiva, who was above him, heard the news. He called in the Rosh Yeshiva, and he asked him what happened. So he told him what happened. What did you do? I expelled him permanently. So this Jew said, I have a question to ask you. The Mishnah says in Masechta Sanhedrin, in the beginning, Dinei ein donin, dinei nefoshes ela b'chav gimel. Death penalty could be issued only with a court of 23 members. Dinei mammon is b'shloisha. Monetary verdict, you can have a court of 3 or a yachid mumcha or an individual expert. But dinei nefashis, death penalty, you needed a bezdin of chav gimel, you needed 23 people. That's the halach. So he tells the Rosh Yeshiva, he says, I have a question. If this is true with physical death penalty, certainly it's true in a spiritual death penalty. When you expel this boy from the yeshiva, he's not going to another shtibel in Bnei Brak or in Meir Shiarim to sit and learn all day. He's going to the streets. Very likely he will be spiritually alienated from his people, from his faith, from Torah and from mitzvahs. It may be the proper verdict. Death penalty may be the proper verdict, but did you have 23 rabbis issuing forth the verdict? So the Rosh Yeshiva tells him, Ich fa'alozich av zich. I relied on my own judgment. His boss told him, listen, I respect your judgment very deeply. I respect you very deeply. But halacha is halacha. Mishnah in Sanhedrin, death penalty 23. Let 23 people come together, convene them, ask what should be done with this bacher who smoked on Shabbos. Perhaps there's no other choice, but we have to set a standard. We can't let him be a bad example, whatever the case is, and we have to sacrifice his soul for the sake of the other students. Granted, but you can't do it on your own. The Rosh Yeshiva insisted, no, I can't do it on my own. So his dean told him, I ask you to take back the student until you do not get the agreement of 23 people, or most of them, a vote. So the Rosh Hashiva told him, listen, I am not taking back the student. If you want to take back the student, it's at my expense. You have to choose between him or me. If he comes back, I am out. I'm resigning today. So the dean told him, he said, Dinei nefashas arbachav gimel. Death penalty, you need 23 members in the court. Dinei mamanis, monetary, is b'shloisha is 3, or yachid mumcha, or an individual scholar, a rabbi, an expert. So he tells him, throwing out this student from yeshiva is dinei nefashas, is an issue of life and death, spiritually speaking. Throwing you out of yeshiva is dinei mamanis. This is already a monetary question. So either 3 or yachid mumcha. Ich bin a yachid mumcha. Geh gesundheit. This dean was a great rabbi and a great halachic authority. I am a yachid mumcha. Geh gesundheit. Go. And the Rosh Hashiva left. And he, the dean, took the student back into yeshiva. Guided him. Spoke to him. Dealt with his frustration, with his questions, with his spiritual agony, and let him come back on the journey towards a re-embracing of Yiddishkeit. For a few weeks he had to give the shiur himself because the Rosh Hashiva was out. After a few weeks the Rosh Hashiva came back. I just want to tell you, my dear friends, that this student, who was taken back in the 1930s, is known as one of the greatest halachic authorities in the Holy Land today. This is the message of the Kohen with the Mitzvah. Only the Kohen has the divine right to say Tameh or to say Tahir. If you're not a Kohen, if you don't care, if you don't love, you can't say Tameh or Tahir. So the next time, before you criticize your spouse, before you criticize your child, before you criticize your student, stop and ask yourself if you're doing it as a kohen, out of concern and care for them, or maybe as a result of your stress, anger, and frustration. If you feel that it's a result of your anger, you may want to remain silent until you can transcend your self-absorption and enter into the world of another human being. Then, when you say Tameh, it will have very different consequences and ramifications. Have a wonderful evening.